Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Dicentra's regulatory webinar for the second quarter of 2012. Thanks for taking the time out of your very, very busy day. Given the ever-changing regulatory climate surrounding natural health products, these webinars are meant to be a non-biased source of education and information for the dietary supplement and natural health industries. Just a little bit about Dicentra before we begin. Dicentra is an international leader in regulatory and scientific affairs within the natural health product industry. Our areas of specialty are in dietary supplement, natural health products, food, beverage, cosmetics, and OTC. You may contact us at any time at info@dicentra.com or by visiting our website at dicentra.com. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. First, there will be no questions and answer time as part of this presentation. This is simply due to the sheer volume of participants. Second, is that we ask you to complete a satisfaction survey which will be sent to you right into your inbox at the end of this presentation. And finally, a recording of this webinar will be available on our website in a few days along with any links referred to during this webinar. It is now my very big pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Heather Van Blaerkong, who is our General Counsel and Senior Regulatory Specialist for Dietary Supplements here at Dicentra. Heather will now give us an update on the important issues affecting dietary supplements in the United States. Heather is a licensed attorney with more than 10 years of experience in the natural products industry. She has extensive experience in proactively helping companies achieve compliance with both FDA and FTC regulations. Welcome, Heather, and please begin.
Thank you for that introduction. Let me first identify for you some of the objectives for our webinar today. First, we hope to provide you with up-to-date information pertaining to the implementation and interpretation of the Natural Health Products Regulation in both the United States of America and Canada. Also, we hope to provide you with other scientific and regulatory information that has relevance to the natural health products industry. I'd also like to give you an overview of our webinar and some of the topics that we're going to be discussing today. First, in the United States, we're going to be talking about the dietary supplement GMPs, the new dietary ingredients, and some other regulatory issues that you may find of interesting lately. Then we're going to move on to Canada, and we're going to talk about the NHPD Status of Applications Quarterly Report, the NHPD Product and Ingredient Information, consultations and regulatory initiatives, and food initiatives. Lastly, we'll be addressing some of the regulatory issues in the European Union. First, the United States. I know you spoke a little bit about this on the previous webinar, but I wanted to give you an update on the status of the NDI draft guidance. The NDI draft guidance, unfortunately, is contrary to both the letter and the congressional intent of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, which we refer to as DSHEA. In fact, DSHEA's own principal authors have criticized the draft guidance in a letter they wrote to Dr. Hamburg, in which they stated that it strays too far from the laws they wrote. They've asked Dr. Hamburg and the agency to withdraw the current guidance and replace it with a version that does not undermine the balance Congress struck in DSHEA to provide consumers with access to safe, affordable dietary supplement products. Additionally, I was in Las Vegas for the NPA Marketplace show on Friday, and Congressman Frank Pallone also spoke on the NDI draft guidance. In fact, he referred to it as a huge misstep. He said that he and his caucus have spent a significant amount of time trying to make sure that the final guidance does not reflect this draft guidance that we've seen. In his opinion, this draft guidance would only increase the burden without creating any kind of additional benefit for consumers. Although we all agree we want a guidance for the NDIs, we don't want one that looks anything like the draft guidance that's been put forward. Just to give you some information on the comments that have been submitted for the NDI draft guidance, The comment period closed on December 2nd, 2011. Approximately 7,000 comments were received by the FDA, totaling about 146,000 pages. Just to put that in perspective, there were 4,000 dietary supplement products on the market when DSHEA was passed in 1994. Now there are roughly 55,600 products, and only 730 NDI applications have been filed. So obviously there is a need for an NDI guidance. We just hope they go back to the drawing board before they issue the final one. Further, trade associations are debating whether or not to target the financial burden aspect of the NDI. But also there's a fear that if we start attacking it from this angle, it may appear as if we're acquiescing to the NDI rather than telling them just to go back to the drawing board. Also, I know you received a little bit of information last time on the good manufacturing practices, but again, I wanted to provide you with an update on things that have happened since our last webinar. As you know, the intent of good manufacturing practices that have been issued were to ensure quality throughout the supply chain. And the GMPs in 21 CFR 111 are applicable to all levels of trade, except for the raw material suppliers. However, those raw material suppliers are now required under the FSMA to have food safety plans, which we'll discuss a little more in our later slides. I also wanted to let you all know that the recent audits have shown that there's more than a 25% failure rate by manufacturers to comply with very basic requirements. These include a failure to conduct identity testing and finished product testing, failure to create batch records, failure to create master manufacturing records, and even failure to create retained samples. I think that's pretty scary from an industry standpoint that we are not able to meet some of these very basic manufacturing practices. Therefore, it's very important that you are reaching out to your vendors and you're doing your appropriate vendor verification, which is also something that Dicentra can help you with. Please be sure that you ask for some basics, from copies of, ask them if they have any Form 483 notices or any warning letters. You should also ask if they have any evidence of insurance, if they have recall procedures in place, and you may want to also ask for referrals. Recently, Dan Fabricant has been emphasizing and implying that there's going to be criminal charges on the horizon for these companies who have received 483s and follow-up warning letters and have still failed to comply with 21 CFR 111 and good manufacturing practices. Next, I'd like to turn to something that we're facing in California. No matter how you feel about GMOs and the labeling, it's going to come to a head in November, and California may become the first state in the nation to require food manufacturers to identify genetically engineered ingredients on the label of food products, and this also includes dietary supplements that are sold in California. And because California is such a major market, the labeling laws in California will undoubtedly affect packaging and ingredient decisions nationwide. Unfortunately, the way that the initiative is written, the enforcement is similar to Prop 65, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. It expands the responsibility for enforcement of the law beyond the purview of the state government, and it puts it into the hands of the citizens without any requirement to show injury. In other words, this means essentially that rings the dinner bell for trial lawyers to bring class action type claims for just technical violations of the law, using strawman plaintiffs to seek penalties and attorney's fees without even having to demonstrate that they were actually harmed. Additionally, something that's expected later this year is that they're going to replace the RDIs, which is the highest recommended dietary allowance, with what they're calling EARs, or the estimated average requirement, as the basis for calculating the percentage of daily values on labels. Now, the difference is that the EARs only cover half of the population, whereas the RDIs were assuring that over 90% of the people get adequate nutrition. So in other words, when you calculate the percentage of daily values using the EARs, the same amount of a nutrient would appear to satisfy a higher percentage, thereby creating a false assumption by consumers that they're obtaining adequate nutrient amounts to maintain optimum health. sadly, it's going to make it look like some of these less foods are going to appear more healthy, and some of the foods that are actually providing us with the adequate nutrients we need are going to appear to be excessive and unnecessary. Next, I'd like to talk to you about the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2010, FSMA. This is something that Kathleen Celebes, Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, has referred to as the most significant food safety law of the last 100 years. Essentially, this is taking a look at the whole food system and strengthening the accountability for prevention throughout the entire food system, domestically and internationally. This covers all companies offering food for sale in the United States, including ingredient suppliers. However, it does not include those manufacturers that are currently following the GMPs for dietary supplements. This was enacted in January 2011. It also expands the FDA's powers. It requires biennial registration for facilities, and it gives the FDA now mandatory recall authority for products that it believes will cause serious adverse consequences. Prior to this enactment, the recalls were voluntary. Additionally, it allows now the FDA to conduct administrative detention when there's reason to believe that the food is adulterated or misbranded. It also vastly increases the FDA's access to all facility records, not just records pertaining to the line that the product was manufactured on, but now if there's other products manufactured on that line, it also opens up all of your records that pertain to all those products as well. They can go into consumer complaints, many more records than they were allowed to in the past. It also entitles them to reinspection fees. So if they have to come back to your facility, they're going to be charging you $225 an hour, and you can bet that they always come in pairs. They're never going to come by themselves. As I mentioned before, this does not apply to dietary supplement manufacturers, but it does apply to dietary ingredient suppliers. The implementation of SFMA is in steps. So as you can see, one of the deadlines is already passed, and they're still in the process of trying to implement it. But the FDA must designate high-risk foods that are subject to additional record-keeping requirements. Additionally, they must issue guidance to assist importers in developing foreign supplier verification programs, and the FDA must promulgate rules for the content of foreign supplier verification programs. In July 2012, the FDA must establish a program that provides for expedited review and importation of goods whose importers have agreed to participate in a voluntary qualified importer program. In January 2013, the FDA must issue a notice of proposed rulemaking to establish record-keeping requirements for facilities that manufacture, process, pack, or hold high-risk foods. Lastly, let me move on to something that came about and was published last Tuesday. The U.S. Preventative Services Task Force's draft report on calcium and vitamin D. There's a link to it here. Unfortunately, the media has generalized these findings that calcium and vitamin D supplements are not recommended and may cause harm. As you all know, these are two ingredients that have been well accepted. And the FDA, in fact, has an approved full health claim for calcium, vitamin D, and osteoporosis. Additionally, in November 2010 report, the Institute of Medicine increased its recommendations for both vitamin D and calcium, supporting a recommended dietary allowance of 600 to 800 IUs of vitamin D and 1,000 to 1,300 milligrams of calcium for adults. To put this in perspective, about 22% of U.S. adults report taking calcium supplements, and additionally 22% of those report using vitamin D as well. Therefore, it's very important to pay attention to the comment period. The comments are due by July 10th, 2012, after which time the draft will be amended if necessary and finalized. That concludes the U.S. portion of this regulatory webinar, and now I have the pleasure of introducing you to our next speaker, Dr. John Harrison, Senior Government Relations Advisor for Dicentra. Dr. Harrison is a toxicology and health risk specialist. He manages Health Canada's Office of Natural Health Products. He has advised the Federal Minister of Health on natural health products policy and held other Health Canada management positions such as Associate Director, Bureau of Medical Devices, and Assistant Director, Bureau of Chemical Hazards. In 2008, Dr. Harrison published a book entitled International Regulation of Natural Healthcare Products. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Heather. Our first slide, or first area, looks at the status of applications in terms of the past quarter. That is the past quarter ending March 31st. So for this quarter, there was a total of 3,440 product license applications completed. 68% resulted in product licenses, 22% were refusals, and 10% were as a result of the applicant withdrawing the application. 37% of the completed PLAs were pre-UPLAR and 63% were post-UPLAR. For the period from the beginning of the regulations in January the 1st, 2004 to the end of the fourth quarter, March 31st, the Natural Health Products Directorate received a total of 68,100 PLAs, and of these, 60,773 or 89% were completed, and the result is 34,043 product licenses. In total, 1,709 companies have received a product license. The Directorate received 10,885 pre-UPLAR PLAs, of which 5,946 or 55% are completed, and the remaining 4,939 will be completed before February 2030. That's the goal of the Directorate. The Directorate received 16,619 post-UPLAR PLAs and amendments, of which 48% fully met the Directorate's pre-cleared information. That's a 60-day target, while the remaining 52% are waiting for a full assessment. That's a 180-day target. Now, since the end of the last quarter, that is March 31st, the Directorate has also done an additional 671 product licenses. So this brings the grand total to 3,714. This represents 49,760 products. And the other thing that's going up is the percentage of completed pre-UPLAR applications. It's now up to 53%. In fact, it increased 3% just since the end of the last quarter. For site licenses and clinical trials, the Directorate's status of applications is doing very well. For instance, for site license, they've got 98% completed. They have 1,293 licenses. For the clinical trials, again, 98% completed. And they have 313 notices of authorization. Overall, they're at like 98 or 99% in terms of renewals or amendments. So they're doing very, very well in this area. The next area is product and ingredient information. So, a comment about the actual Directorate. From the last federal budget of this spring, the actual Directorate's budget will be reduced by 40% over 3 years. The $19 million budget is going to drop $7 million to $12 million, and staff levels will go from 190 to 120. All of this is really part of the expected regulatory modernization process. And part of this, the Directorate points out, is part of the business of encouraging the various customers or companies to use the electronic product license applications. The next area is consultations and regulatory initiatives. On April the 2nd, the Directorate announced the release of updated versions of the Electronic Product License Application Form, or the EPLA. This is now available on the Directorate's website. And the previous version of the EPLA has been split into two separate EPLAs. They are compendial from generated monograph EPLA and a non-generated application type. And they're trying to do this to improve overall functionality when applying for directorates. They've also released an update to the Electronic Submission Builder, the ESB, to be compatible with the newer versions. And basically, they'd like companies to start using these electronic documents. The evidence for safety and efficacy of finished natural health products guidance document, version 2, is being replaced by two revised draft guidance documents. One is a pathway for the licensing of natural health products, making modern health claims, and the second is with regard to traditional medicines as opposed to modern health claims. These have had extensive revisions, and the Directorate is accepting comments on these drafts all the way to August the 21st of this year. The Directorate also sought feedback with regard to a probiotics monograph and abbreviated labeling standard for live microorganisms. And they wanted, they published for a 30-day consultation period. That ended May the 15th. And they had an information update for applicants with products containing enzyme ingredients and a notification of consultation. Some of the enzymes include things such as lactase and trypsin. On the proposed revision to marine oil monographs, the Directorate had revised specification section of the monographs for fish oil, cod liver oil, seal oil, multiple ingredient joint health products, and multiple ingredient oil products, such as krill oil, abbreviated labeling standard. Now, these revisions are primarily address the maximum limits allowable for polychlorinated dibenzoparadioxins, or basically various toxic chemicals. And that consultation period ended May 15th. Now, moving into areas of food initiatives. The new Canadian Federal Bill C-38 introduced a food modernization and Schedule F changes. And perhaps one of the most powerful points here is that the Division 19 of Part 4 amends the Food and Drugs Act to give the Minister of Health the power to establish a list that sets out prescription drugs or classes of prescription drugs, and to provide the list may be incorporated by reference. But even more important, it gives the minister the power to issue marketing authorizations that exempt a food or an advertisement with respect to a food from certain provisions of the Act. This is really quite new, and this is part, as they explain, of the new modernization of the Food Act with regard to food. There will be a transition of various products going from natural health products to foods, and at this interface, examples are such things as waters and juices with added vitamins and minerals. And as a matter of fact, as of April the 17th, 2012, the Natural Health Products Directorate no longer accepts natural health product applications for products that are represented, packaged, or sold as foods. Additional categories of products are now marketed as natural health products and classified as foods. And this transition, as we just noted, began April. There's three categories: NHPs as foods with no regulatory changes, NHPs that require regulatory changes but have no reformulation, and then finally, as you would guess, NHPs that require regulatory changes and need reformulation to meet the food regulations. Now, this transition process is expected to be completed by December 2012, and the idea is for it to coincide with the repealing of the UPLAR product license applications for February the 4th, 2013. Further, with regard to this, up to July 2012, Health Canada will be having consultation with stakeholders and develop, and they'll share performance standards for TMA submissions, explaining the commitment and the timelines for the processing of these new submissions. With regard to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, they've had announcements in April with regard to strengthening the safety of imported food. So they do have some proposed new regulations with regard to food importers, and that food importers have to be licensed, and there's going to be measures in place to basically to keep unsafe food out of the marketplace. There'll also be provisions to allow certification for foods for export. Now, the regulations being developed in close consultation with industry, so the food safety objectives can continue to be met with minimal burden on business operations. The proposed regulations would include a range of tools and streamlined processes to help importers, especially smaller enterprises and companies, transition to the new requirements. There will be user fees. And consultations on a user fee proposal for the licensing cost and regime will go from April to June the 29th of this year. In terms of strengthening food inspection, CFIA is seeking input from stakeholders on ways that Canada's science-based inspection system can be enhanced. There is a discussion document called The Case for Change. It's available for comment, and CFIA is accepting feedback up to July the 31st. This feedback will naturally help the agency in terms of its food inspection approach, and we've listed a reference on the slide where you can get more information. CFIA is reminding industry that the enhanced labeling regulations for food allergens come into force August 4th, 2012. And in anticipation of the enhanced labeling regulations, they've recently posted a web page on enhanced labeling regulations for food allergens, which includes an overview of the new requirements. Health Canada. Health Canada recently, that is June the 8th of this year, released a new guidance document for the food industry on reducing sodium in processed foods. The goal here by 2016 for the Canadian population is to have the average sodium intake down to 2,300 milligrams per day, and there is a guidance document available, and we list the URL on the slide for that. Now for the European Union, we have 3 slides. The first slide with regard to the European Food Safety Authority. On June the 4th, 2012, the EFSA published an updated version of its Compendium of Botanicals, a table containing naturally occurring substances reported to be of possible concern for human health when used in food and food supplements. This is of concern to Canada and Canadian manufacturers and suppliers, and oftentimes the European regs are then carried over and considered by Canadian authorities. And we have the URLs for that reference. They've also recently published a final guidance document with regard to scientific requirements for health claims related to bone, joints, skin, and oral health. And again, a reference is listed there. New European regulation for food additives and colors. The new Commission regulation by the EU, number 231 of this year, 2012, governing specifications for food additives, including colors and sweeteners, that have been published in the official journal of the European Union, the 22nd of March, 2012. It lays, with regard to this, it lays down the information required for identifying each product, including the origin, purity criteria, etc. Now, this new text, 2012 text, repeals the older 2008 directives. There were 3 of them, and it updates specifications for several additives according to recent scientific data. This regulation enters into force the 20th day following the publication in the official journal of the European Union, and so it will apply the 1st of December 2012. The third slide concerns implementing rules for regulation number 1925/2006. This regulation aims at ruling the addition of vitamins, minerals, and other substances to foods. Article 8 of the regulation, focused on the so-called other substances, foresees a specific procedure to prohibit, restrict, or place under scrutiny a substance other than vitamins or minerals that's added to foods under conditions that would result in the ingestion of amounts of this substance greatly exceeding those reasonably expected to be ingested under normal conditions of consumption of a balanced and varied diet. And finally, for the 12th of April 2012, the Commission implementing regulation was published in the Official Journal of the European Union in the purpose of implementing the rules for the application of Article 8 for number 1925/2006. So I want, on behalf of everyone and on behalf of dicentra, I want to thank everyone for listening to this webinar, and I might suggest that you please visit the dicentra website in a few days if you'd like to see